Hello there and welcome. I'm Carissa Miller. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the Council of Chief State School Officers. Our membership organization has the privilege of working to state chiefs from all 50 states, the U.S. territories, the Department of Defense Education Activity, the Bureau of Indian Education in Washington, D.C. We are pleased to work with the Reagan Institute in putting together today's dynamic panel. State education chiefs have worked tirelessly since the beginning of the pandemic to safely educate all students, reopen their school buildings, address learning gaps, meet student and school staff mental health and well-being needs, and more. While many students across the country are back in the classroom, there is much work ahead to ensure that students have the accelerated learning and well-being supports they need to thrive. This is also a moment of opportunity for states to build more modernized, equitable education systems. And I know the chiefs we are about to hear from are thinking about the advancements they can make for the students, educators, and their families in their states. CCSSO is honored to support them and their colleagues in this work. Today, I'm proud to welcome the Reagan Institute Stage 4 exemplary state education leaders to share about the work happening to move forward in each of their states, as well as their vision for the future of education. Today's panelists include Tennessee Commissioner Penny Schwinn, South Carolina Superintendent and CCSSO Board President-elect Milly Spearman, Nevada Superintendent Jhone Ebert, and Nebraska Commissioner and CCSSO Board President Matthew Blomstedt. And now it's my privilege to turn the conversation over to today's moderator, Ella Endorf, a Nebraska native attending the University of Mississippi and a student leader at the Reagan Institute Leadership and the American Presidency Program. Over to you, Ella.
All right, thank you so much for that awesome introduction. I think that really sets us off perfectly. So let's head right on into our first question. So this has undoubtedly been a challenging year for students across the country. Despite setbacks, states have started down a path of recovery through the American Rescue Plan. What is your vision for how to best invest in initiatives, programs, and priorities that will last longer than just a few years post-pandemic? As a Nebraska native, I'd like to turn to Superintendent Blomstedt to get us started.
And thanks, Ellen. It's a pleasure to be with you today. You know, one of the challenges I think that we all face is not really knowing what normal is anymore. And I think it's really important that we recognize this in the moment in time that our students are facing many different circumstances, many different challenges. Our teachers are, our schools are, our communities are. And it's really important that we take, as leaders, kind of take stock of where we're at and try to really grow from there. And from a Nebraska perspective, we really wanted to focus on unfinished learning versus the notion that there was learning loss, because we expect that there were impacts throughout the pandemic. We want to measure those and move ourselves forward in the best way possible, while still just constantly knowing that the engagement with students and families is our key strategy relative to everything else that we may do. It's just the key strategy to know that they're engaged and that they're doing well, and that our teachers in our schools are able to do that as well.
Thank you so much. Superintendent Ebert, would you like to tell us a bit more about your plan?
Thank you. As my colleague Matt, said, I really appreciate being here as well to talk about in Nevada. We took the crisis and tightly focused and started to think about renewal and future-proofing our education system. So we've prioritized projects that will lay a foundation for us for years to come. And what we're particularly proud of is our Blue Ribbon Commission that we spun up rather quickly. They are in charge of designing and future-proofing, making sure that we have a globally prepared Nevada. They were convened this fall, and it was really exciting because we invited every constituent, if you will, to the table virtually as a core group. We had parents, we had our educators themselves. We had students who enlightened us greatly each and every time of when sometimes the adults would start down the path and they're like, wait a minute, this is what we're experiencing each and every day, and this is how the policy needs to change. So we took those conversations that were had and actually brought them forth during the legislative session, changed a lot of the framework about how we think about our education system, and specifically how we think about seat time and student competencies. We know that some of the students flourished during this pandemic. They were able to take advantage of several resources that were made available to them. We also know that other students did not have those same opportunities. And so making sure that we accelerate those students that didn't have those opportunities, as well as allowing those students that did accelerate to continue moving forward. So we're very excited that our school districts were able to have students in the classroom this last spring. Some of them had them since September, but we do have a lot of work to do, and we continue to work with our colleagues at CCSSO and constituents across the state.
Thank you so much. Superintendent Spearman, what about you?
Well, thank you for having me on, and it's great to hear what my colleagues are doing like their states. We too are very interested in making sure that we provide all the resources that our students, our teachers need to get back into school safely, looking to be sure that we support them for their physical, emotional, mental health is a huge issue for us. So our plan will include lots of resources there. We're also looking at our literacy program, really enhancing that, making sure that we deliver high quality instruction. We have additional support for those students who need extra help in literacy and in math interventions. We're also using this plan to take care of some facility needs across our state, and often that is in our highest poverty areas, in our rural areas, that we make the capital improvements for their buildings and even some new construction that will be going on. And one thing that I'm really proud of, and maybe we can talk about it a little more in detail later, but partnerships with all of our agencies. We can't do all of this work by ourselves through the Department of Education or through our school districts. So we are encouraging and have established new partnerships with many other agencies, from the Department of Mental Health to the Arts Commission. And so we're very, very excited about the collaboration that will go on in supporting school districts across the state.
That's wonderful. And that's such a great point. And last but certainly not least, Commissioner Schwinn, how's Tennessee doing?
Sure. So Tennessee is really focused on acceleration. We want to make sure that we take advantage of this moment in time to put our students on a completely different path than they otherwise would have been, in a really positive way. I think some of that kicked off last year. We had a special legislative session in January, and during that time, we passed some landmark legislation that I think for us is about what is the legacy that we will lead in a positive way, or leave in a positive way for our students moving forward. So we passed a comprehensive literacy bill, as well as a student acceleration bill. And some of the things that are coming off of that really dovetail with our strategic plan. Because frankly, the gaps that we had before the pandemic are the same gaps that we have now. They've just been expanded, and I think frankly been highlighted in a way that allows us to intervene even more aggressively, and for our districts to really focus there. But I think the hallmark right now in Tennessee is that we are going to focus on a few things, do them very well and in depth. And we are incentivizing our districts to have a similar level of commitment to those same key areas, because we know that if we are all doing different things, we are not going to see the movement at scale. So for us, it's our three core priority areas: academics, student readiness, and educators. For academics, we have summer school. I was on a bus for visiting 50 districts this June to see summer programs. Those are now a permanent legacy project. Summer school will be available at no cost for our students moving forward every summer. We have literacy, a comprehensive Reading 360 literacy plan. We are training 11,000 plus teachers this summer, plus 100 districts of our 147 who are participating in that. And then a statewide tutoring program, the Tennessee All-Core, to provide high dosage, low ratio tutoring for any student who wants it credit, and then exclusive access for all students in high school. I think, on top of that, with academics and moving into student readiness, we're doing a lot with mental health and supports related to bridging external providers with schools so that schools can focus on the business of educating students academically, and then taking those health professionals with families together and figuring out how to provide additional supports for our students. But we're also focusing on access and opportunity for high school students. We have AP Access for All, that now those rural students who have connectivity and devices, they can now access AP classes in a way that they were not scaled to do before the pandemic. Their systems were just too small and they couldn't afford the level of variety that some of our larger systems could. So now we've got a massive increase in the number of students who can access free dual credit plus AP. And then the last thing I would say in terms of our focus is on Grow Your Own. We have over 36 districts who are participating in this, and that has now expanded by a lot because of the federal funding. But essentially, we want to make sure that there are no vacancies for educators, that every child has a highly qualified teacher in front of them for every class every day. And we are actually funding teachers to be able to get their undergrad plus their credential while studying in real time under a master or mentor teacher for 2 years. So, and all at the cost of the state, so that the first year teacher now is a third year veteran and they go into that profession without any debt. We need to make sure that Tennessee is the #1 place to become and remain a teacher. And we actually think that removing all barriers to the profession has got to be a priority for us. So those are our 3 core areas in terms of real action-oriented approach. And we'll move aggressively because we think kids deserve it. And we think this is an opportunity to accelerate achievement.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So it's clear that this year has impacted some students more than others. The Department of Education gave guidance for how states and districts can spend the federal dollars that they've received. What sort of guidance are you and your offices providing to local districts to ensure that they support our most vulnerable students? Any one of you that is particularly passionate can go ahead.
Well, we're probably all passionate. I'll jump in because they're going to have all the best things to say after I'm done. So the reality, I think, for us and from a statewide perspective, we knew that there'd be differential impacts that were hitting our students. And one of the challenges, I think, in a federal policy, when you try to make those decisions about what those real impacts are, the further away you do that from a local community, the harder it is. So we really need to be able to establish a set of plans that help drive the equity conversations that we've already been having around education. There's some really some great opportunities for folks to be innovative in this moment. And I forget which of my great colleagues has talked about acceleration, right? It's knowing where our students are at and accelerating them towards their goals. Ultimately, that has to be part of that particular process. On the federal side, those goals don't necessarily always line up well with the local goals. I think, Ella, you might know a superintendent somewhere in the state of Nebraska that might agree with that somewhere. But the reality for us is really this partnership that we need between federal and state and local. And if we can balance all that well, and that's really a responsibility I think all of us as state chief leaders have to be able to address. And we'll constantly do that, work with our locals. It's not always a really pretty event, but when you do that well, it yields the better results. And that's what we need right now. We don't really have kind of the time or luxury of time to figure out how to balance that. I think we're doing a really good job and just super impressed with what's happening across our states to drive that type of innovation.
Ella, if I may, one of the things that I'm really proud of that we were able to do in South Carolina, since we were not able to give our spring assessments last year due to the pandemic, our districts, and we had legislation that required all of our districts to assess students within the first 10 days, whether it was virtually or in person, with our formative or interim assessments. We did that again in December and at the end of the year. And we work with Education Analytics to form a new tool. We call it the Rally tool. And we were able to send all of our LEAs specific information on each student, comparative data across the state, and to help them really know where their students were and how they should plan to work with those students. So being able to give that disaggregated data to every agency and to every school district, every teacher in the state was able to get that information despite the fact that they weren't able to give their normal assessments. So that has really helped us to gauge where our students are and who needs help, when, and how. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, and I think to build on what Superintendent Spearman said, and I think it's so important, is that component of data and then just the responsibility we have to steward this process well as state chiefs, because we are the connector between the federal government and our local school districts. And I think here in Tennessee, we're taking that fiscal responsibility very seriously in terms of, the federal government will give us some guidelines about the data we need to collect. We are also really focused on assessment and making sure we're doing data-driven decisions, and that's how we're investing our funds. But we also want to make sure that our districts are positioned with the kind of support they need to manage and report on those funds, to make sure that we can account for every single cent and that we know exactly what outcomes were generated from those funds. So we are strongly encouraging, just short of requiring, though I would say some districts would argue the other, that all districts put aside at least 1% for data collection, reporting, monitoring, and auditing, so that there are a lot of checks and balances and safety nets around the appropriate use and stewardship of those funds. That is a massive thing that we are focused on, that we have student achievement data connected directly to those funds. And we are providing a lot of grant opportunities. Every district had at least $125,000 planning grant to be able to set up those structures and systems to be able to report very transparently to their public exactly what is happening with the money. I think with this many billions of dollars, we as states have got to be responsible to show this is how we've moved education forward, because this is a big investment from our taxpayers across the country. And the only thing I would add to that is we have what's called Best for All districts. Those are districts that get incentives. It's celebration, it's additional resources, extra money, operational benefits like Fast Pass. We call them Fast Pass. I love Disneyland, but it's like a Fast Pass for reimbursements, different ways to incentivize really structured investments and investments that we think are going to move student achievement forward. We've created 26 different benefits for those districts, again, to try to incentivize responsible decision-making and strategy at the local level.
So rounding that out, what I would add is, the accountability component is huge. Accountability with flexibility. In Nevada, I have the 5th largest school district in the nation. So 310,000 students in one school district, which covers over 8,000 square miles. So they have urban, extreme urban, suburban, and rural in one school district. And then another school districts, like my colleagues here, I have a school district that has less than 100 students. And so as we work with our new secretary and his team, making sure that conversation is tight, right? We all have an understanding of expectations, but allowing that flexibility to transpire, as well as a state chief, working with the school districts, making sure that those outcomes, as my colleague said earlier, making sure that we have the student outcomes, that we're closing those opportunity gaps, that they do not exist. Every student in Nevada does have a device now and does have connectivity. Every student that's participating at a distance. So to Penny's comment on AP, there's no reason for every single student to be able to participate in whatever coursework they choose, and that it's made available statewide.
Okay, well, thank you all so much. Those were so fascinating. I know I've been taking mental notes. So students everywhere have really struggled a lot with isolation and anxiety, even more so in the past few years. What kind of investments and support services do you provide to ensure that mental health is supported in all of your students? Anyone can go ahead and hop in.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in briefly, because I think my colleagues are doing some amazing work, and I'm in awe of what their leadership has shown in their states. So I think, in Tennessee, I feel very lucky. Our governor has a $250 million trust fund that was approved by the General Assembly specifically for mental health supports in our K-12 schools. That's, again, some of this legacy project and legacy investments that we're trying to do to make sure this is not a one and done in the next 3 or 4 years, but this is something that is a new track that we have laid for students in the future. We're building on that by saying, if there's this trust fund available to focus on mental health, we have one of our higher ed partners who's doing a landscape analysis, so that no matter where you live, we know exactly what resources are available in the community through state government and local government, et cetera. And then an online tool that allows for districts to have really quick access to those services, know which ones are free, which ones cost, what you can use insurance for, et cetera. And then the last thing is we're doing mental health grants to districts to be able to create sustainable programs and connections with local and state providers, so that when the money runs out, this one one-time funding runs out, as I keep reminding our superintendents, one time, when that money is gone, we have actually created sustainable programs so that students can continue to receive services from those expert providers outside of the school systems, and that we're doing that in concert with our families, our K-12, and our community organizations.
That's great, Penny. I'll just add a couple of things that we have going on here in South Carolina. And again, it's been through a great partnership with our Department of Mental Health and ensuring that we have year-round counselors available, that those school counselors are on duty and working during the summer months so that students have the access to those services throughout the year. We also have had great success with telepsychiatry. As you know, telehealth is a new phenomenon for all of us, but over the last 2-3 years, we have really had great success by delivering psychiatric services to students through the Medical University of South Carolina, where psychiatrists are available and can give really high quality services, particularly out in the rural areas or in places where those doctors are just not available. And so during the pandemic, we've been able to give over 100,000 sessions with students by having the little black box available, a computer screen, and it is very, very effective treatment and services for those students. So those are some of the ways that we are supporting our students in South Carolina.
That's great.
In Nevada, we have the SEED Center, which is social, emotional, academic as well. The support there is directly for our educators. We know that our most meaningful opportunity is to proactively support our educators each and every day through our pandemic, and also supporting our educators. We have had trauma across the United States globally, and that's the entire system that needs the support. So equipping our educators with the tools and empowering them with the knowledge to support our students is critical. And I'm very proud of the project that our team has been working on with the school districts.
Yeah, we really found in Nebraska, man, again, kind of as I started, one of the key things is knowing that our students are well engaged and doing well in every sense of that. And of course, there was a mental health crisis taking place before the pandemic even hit. And there was a lot of efforts being, underway about partnerships, but actually through the pandemic, we built even more robust partners with our public health, with our schools and communities in different ways that we never imagined. For example, we're doing a very big partnership with our Nebraska Children and Families Foundation. We started a partnership to ensure that families had food resources, that families had everything that they needed to be able to manage through the pandemic. And we know now, again, as we've seen, that mental health is just one of those areas in which it takes a lot of different resources and a lot of different opportunities to do that. So we're really looking at school community resources in different ways across the state of Nebraska. It wasn't necessarily a popular thing before. Folks would say, well, that's not really the school's responsibility. And I think where we've landed is that there's really agreement that the schools are a great source. It's not their responsibility alone, but it's really a great source to be able to leverage this together with community resources and state resources. And we'll see that done with our private and public partnerships all over the state. And I'm very proud of that. And again, those are things that I think we've created innovations in this moment out of the necessity, out of the needs that were there, and continue to do that. And to me, they'll become a permanent part of our role and mission going forward.
All right, thank you all so much. I think we have time for one more very brief question. So one of the primary roles of our education system is preparing students to enter civic life. With growing concern over civic literacy and health and a generation plagued by polarization, how do you plan to support and prepare students for civic life and approach and respond to controversial topics?
Well, I'll jump in first on this one. One of the most important things, and we've been working on this forever, that our responsibility in our public school system is to have our students prepared to be not only know their content and have the skills to do career jobs, but to be good citizens. And it's one of our most important responsibilities. And in order to be a good citizen, I think the first thing you have to appreciate each other and understand the dignity and value of each person, and to be a good listener, and to build on our values, that we support each other, that we care about each other. So we are working on, this summer, we were fortunate to work with John Maxwell, the noted author, who has presented leadership development for years, and he and his staff are working with us. We have a project that we'll be doing in our middle schools for students to talk to each other, to learn more about each other through their iLead program. And there are other leadership development programs that many of our schools are using already. But I think just preparing our students so that they can listen, that they appreciate each other, they can listen and have good conversations, even though they may not agree on everything, is a skill that every citizen needs. So we're going to be working on that and a specific focus with middle school students.
Wonderful.
It's such a unique moment. I mean, we've seen kind of political divisiveness. If I reflect back last summer, I mean, some of our biggest gatherings that took place were in June of last year in protests in several of our cities, including in Nebraska. And I'm just going to tell you, we know that we had school age students involved in many of those conversations, many of those directions. And I really felt very responsible to think about where are we going to go to really have folks be able to feel engaged in the moment versus lost in this. And I think it goes to this real importance of what happens at schools around civil discourse, around research and understanding the content, around having disputes without having fights, right? It's that ability to do that. And I've learned so much from my own kids and students across the state about how they can interact in those moments and continue to do that. And we have just so much of that as a country to do. And so we've put, civic readiness among our, college career and civic readiness in Nebraska among the forefront of what we would like to accomplish. I think over this last year, it's changed how we need to think about preparing students, like real active engagement in opportunities for them to be part of real conversations. And part of the challenge always is, students are actually quite busy people, as it turns out. But you got to find ways to actually have them engaged. And I think we're probably seeing that as state agencies more and more. How do we engage our students in meaningful conversations? Then the sooner the better. And so I'm excited for that and for seeing that come to fruition at this moment.
Go ahead, Penny.
I was doing the polite 3-second wait. You were going to pop in. I'll just say, Governor Lee has been focused on what we call the Civic Seal here. And that is really, these are grants we give to schools and districts for them to develop and support civics content, programming, and certainly opportunities for students that are really localized and really reflect that local community and some of the things that are really important for them to talk about in that time. And I think we've said local so many times in this conversation, because that's the real balance we have as state chiefs, is that we've got to make sure that we are considering all of the voices within our respective states, and all of our states are going to have lots of different voices in there. And we need to also make sure that while we are balancing those conversations, we are really allowing our local district superintendents to lead and manage their communities in the way that makes the most sense for them. I always joke that our superintendents are often like the other mayor of our cities. They have a lot of responsibility, and certainly our community leaders. And so for us, I think the Civic Seal is a really important component. We're investing in that, and we certainly want to continue to expand that voice. But I'd also say that part of our responsibility is to engage in some of these hard conversations. And I'm taking it, frankly, from the perspective of being a mom with 3 young kids, 2 of whom are in public schools, and sitting down across a kitchen table from other moms who are talking about what's real for them and what's important to them and why, and continuing to build that empathy lens and saying, how can we come together? Because our focus has got to be on children. And frankly, from my perspective, only on kids. That is my job. And that's really hard to balance. And I think it is going to be something we have to hold ourselves accountable to, and having really professional discourse and being able to be open to everybody having a voice, because that's what our great country is about. I think reflecting those values that are the foundational bedrock of the United States is going to be part of the leadership we can show here.
So civic literacy, as we're all being civil, definitely is woven into many aspects of our education system here in Nevada and nationally as well. And our goal is to help our students connect early. And so it's actually in our content and curriculum K-12, listening for understanding and making sure that we speak with voice and can have that discourse is critical. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll just stop right there.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for speaking with us today. On behalf of the Reagan Institute, I'd like to especially thank you for your hard work and dedication to students this year and for lending your voice to us at RISE. Thank you again.